AAC&U and the PI of the Faculty Collaboratives Project. I'm happy to welcome you to the 6th of our all-project webinars for the Faculty Collaboratives, a project of the Association of American Colleges and Universities. The webinar today is going to explore assignment design. Let me take a minute to tell you about the webinar features we'll be using today. I see that a number of people are coming in, so if you would listen up about the features. We have muted all of you. We've learned from experience that it works best that way. As a reminder, if you want to participate and you want the sound, you should dial in using the toll number for audio. And if you would, please don't try to use your computer's audio function because we find it interferes with our recording. And we actually are recording all these webinars so that people can use them over again. We strongly encourage you, indeed, we need you to ask questions via the chat function. You'll see that little chat bubble. You'll find that icon at the top right of the webinar screen. In order for everyone to see your question or your observation, you should select all participants, that is, all participants before sending it. So do that. Now, if for some reason you want only the presenters to see what you say, you could select send to panelists, and we all see it that way. But we're going to be collecting what you ask and what you observe, and we'll use that in the Q&A. There will be a polling feature during the webinar. You'll see it when we come to it. Pat will ask you to answer a question via a polling mechanism, and you'll have a short period to respond. It's between 15 and 30 seconds. The question's going to appear in the bottom section of the screen. And once the poll is closed, you'll be able to see the results in real time. We like this. We think it's a kind of neat feature to help us gauge where each of you are in relation to the topic. And as I said, once again, we will collect your questions throughout the call, present and address them during the Q&A. And so please do help us out with a question. If for any reason you're having any sort of technical difficulties, you are welcome to email Melissa Gray at Gray, G-R-A-Y, at aacu.org. Melissa will email back to you and try and troubleshoot the issue. And I think we're set, Melissa. If you would get to the next slide, please. In a series of webinars, AAC&U is offering an overview and introduction to the constituent parts of this large multi-year faculty professional learning project. Our goal in the project is to invite growing numbers of faculty into collaboration for student success. And if you have ever looked with confusion at the array of acronyms for educational renewal and reform, this project is for you. That's why we're doing it. Specifically, we're hoping to make it possible for all faculty, all educators in the LEAP states particularly and beyond to participate in large-scale projects that are intended to improve student learning in college. We really want to bring liberal education to absolutely all students and to make equitable achievement of education outcomes possible for all students. And to do that, we need to be thoughtful, pull initiatives together, integrating them, working together, collaborating, and we do think it's possible. That's what this project's about. Now, today's webinar is going to be led by Pat Hutchings, Senior Scholar at NILOA. That's the National Institute for Learning Outcomes Assessment. And as I said before, we will record the webinar and make it publicly available in the LEAP Campus Toolkit so you can visit it later. We're very delighted that Pat is here, and I am ready to turn over to Pat. Next slide.
Well, good, and thanks to Susan and her AAC&U colleagues for hosting this webinar. It's really great to see the interest in assignments and assignment design, because assignments really are where our goals and expectations for students get played out in the real daily work of teaching and learning. So for me, that kind of brings to mind the phrase about walking the talk. So let me start by giving you a sense of the plan for the next hour. Next slide, please. A little time setting the stage in terms of the work that my organization, Susan just mentioned it, NILOA, is doing with assignments, and what really prompted us to take up this topic. Then we'll look closely at the power of assignments and how to really get the power from assignments, not just in individual courses, but for propelling larger learning-centered reform efforts, like the ones you just saw in the acronym slide, and more useful forms of assessment for improvement. So one that has found, and I think this is something to celebrate, is a growing interest on campuses in providing support for faculty who want to share and talk about and reflect upon and improve their assignments. So models to share in that regard, ways to enter into such work, lessons from campuses who've been moving in this direction, maybe some of yours, in which case I would especially urge you, as Susan did, to use the chat feature and chime in with other ideas. We'll look briefly at a few resources on assignment design. Next slide. In all of this goal, my purpose is to help you gather ideas about how your campus, or it might be a system or a state, can engage more faculty more deeply in collaborative work on assignment design that can propel learning-centered reform. And this reflects my assumption that many of you are interested in thinking about your own assignments, and they're about your own teaching and course design and so forth, but they're also interested in providing leadership for other faculty and colleagues who might value opportunities to participate in such work. Next slide. So I said, and I want to begin with NILOA. Dan McInerney generously mentioned our work a number of times during his webinar a few weeks ago. Perhaps some of you were tuned into that, as I was. You see our mission here toward the top of the slide. In a nutshell, or an elevator speech, if you will, we seek out and promote to help shape approaches to assessment that are not about clients, or at least not mostly about that, but about improving the experience of students. And I would say that mission keeps us pretty busy. You'd be familiar with some of our activities. I'm looking at the bulleted section of the slide here. Survey of campus practice, case studies of campuses that are doing interesting things, the transparency framework, our newsletter, which just came out a couple days ago. Next slide. And most of today's webinar, the last two items on this list, NILOA's work with the degree qualifications profile and tuning, this is our cousin, if you will, and the assignment library initiative. Next slide. See in your work, well, you read Chronicle, you may well have some familiarity with the degree qualifications profile. There are some, I've kind of lost track of the numbers, but approaching 600 campuses that have at least explored the DQP and had some preliminary conversation. And Dan's webinar a few weeks ago focused on the DQP and on tuning. So I don't want to get too deeply into the weeds here, but simply put, the DQP is a framework for what students should be expected to know and do, regardless of their major, in 5 areas of proficiency, which be in the blue box on the right. I would imagine those look familiar to all of you. They are picked up in other frameworks as well. And each of those proficiencies is then framed or defined in terms of 3 successive degree levels: the associate, the bachelor's, and the master's. Next slide. So it's important to harvest or track how campuses engage with the DQP, and to some extent recently tuning as well. And you see some of the things we've uncovered here along the John Deere harvester. A lot of campuses are using the DQP to examine, clarify, and align their own outcomes. One thing we heard is that lots of campuses have lots of different conversations about outcomes going on, and the DQP can provide what one person has called a universal translator. Campuses are prompted by the DQP and tuning to do curricular mapping. There's attention to transfer, for instance, through AAC and U's project from, I guess it ended about a year ago, quality collaboratives, where campuses work together 2 and 4 years to use UP to think about smoothing and facilitating transfer. Some campuses are rethinking assessment, not as something to be added on or a sampling of a few students, but as a condition for all students to move it in their degree program. But what's interesting to me in this harvesting effort is the last one on the list in beautiful John Deere green. Campuses that we're creating or redesigning assignments to align more closely with DQP proficiencies. Just DQP proficiencies, but also sometimes with tune outcomes in the disciplines, and often with AAC and U's essential learning outcomes, and often with local institutional outcomes in view. Often with more than one of these, because as many of you will know, those different frameworks overlap in lots of different ways. Regardless of which outcomes or proficiency framework is in play, the idea here is that unless assignments both foster and document valued, commonly cross-cutting outcomes, we aren't going to get very far. Next slide. Interest and energy on campuses, this appetite, for opportunities to focus on the design and use of assignments tied to critical learning outcomes. What NILOA did is what we typically do, and that is to turn to the field, in this case by doing the 3 things you see on the slide: inviting faculty who want to work on assignments to submit a draft of an assignment that they'd like to focus on, bringing that group together for a day of conversation and peer collaboration, and then working in small groups, which we call charrettes. Next slide. And the charrette thing. So here's the answer. The charrette really comes from the French, meaning a small cart, which may not have looked like the grocery cart you see here. In architecture, students once deposited their drawings, their designs, once the time came to an end. And so it's an intense and collective creative effort in a limited amount of time. And that's a pretty good description of the NILOA assignment design event. To be honest, we picked the term not only for its meaning, because it sounded like more fun to come to a charrette than to come to a meeting. So back to the middle here. The events that go through NILOA's charrette process of peer collaboration and review. We've now done 3 charrettes and we'll do 1 more in February. Be part of NILOA's assignment library. You see the link at the top of the page, and then some key features of the site, which I'll just run down quickly here. There are, I haven't actually counted them in the last week, about 50 assignments in the collection. The collection will continue to grow as a consequence of the upcoming charrette in February, and also through a newer online submission process. That is, you need not come to a charrette in order to contribute to the library. So if you or some of your colleagues have assignments we should consider, please think about using the online process. I'll point to it later in the webinar. So it appears has been revised and we think improved through the feedback provided by our process of peer collaboration and review during the charrette. Faculty go back from the charrette, often try the assignment again, and as I say, look at the feedback they got from colleagues. Assignments come from faculty from a wide range of fields and different kinds of institutions at different different degree levels. And if right, you'll find a set of keywords we've used to make the collection searchable. You can field. You can look for assignments in the social sciences, say, field or family of fields. You can look by type of assignment. Are you looking for a writing assignment? Maybe a research assignment that entails some work in a library? You're looking for assignments that might entail a group presentation. And you can search particularly by DQP proficiency. I'm also given a scholarly citation in recognition of the fact that assignment design is significant intellectual work, scholarly work, that is, and I really is part of the scholarship of teaching and learning. So that's the library, and I'll show you a few screenshots at the end of our time today. The final item on the slide in orange there points to one more dimension of the Assignment Library Initiative, which we, or at least I, didn't really anticipate, and that is this. As people read the charrette at the end of the day, this has happened repeatedly, they often tell us how excited they are at the idea of sharing their work through the library, an honor, and also that the chance to talk with others about an assignment they're working on and their students are working on has been one of the most powerful professional development experiences they've ever had. They also mentioned that it's the most powerful DQ experience they've had. But here's the but. But what they're really excited about is figuring out how to take the process home and get their colleagues on campus engaged with assignment design. Next slide. So I'm mentioned a few slides ago at the beginning of the webinar that some of you are also interested in that is, in engaging your colleagues on campus. And so turning to the next section, the one after that, which will actually have some suggestions for you in that regard, I thought it would be interesting to do a little poll. Susan anticipated this in her opening comments. It will pop up, I hope, in just a moment here in a way that lets you respond. The poll things stand on your campus in terms of attention to assignment. And you have 5 choices here. The first one is by way of saying assignments are, pretty private work on my campus and not really shared. I read all of these to you because you can read them, but if you skip all the way to 5, you sort of see the other end of the continuum. That work on assignments is really seen as scholarly and therefore shared and valued work and appropriately rewarded. There's the poll. That's good to see. So let me give you a minute to just read through these choices and pick one, punch the little bullet there, that best characterizes the situation on your campus in terms of attention to assignment. I realize that these options are not mutually exclusive, but I am asking you to pick so that we'll get a kind of profile of where they stand. And we'll see the results pop up. So I'll be quiet while you make your switch. All right, and here we see the results. I'm assuming that all of you can see them as well. If not, let me say that it looks like some of you have not answered, but 37% of you said there's some sharing. Some colleagues share assignments in informal ways. That's not a surprise to me. I think I've used this little poll in a few other settings, mostly live settings, and that's often the answer. That there's, and it speaks to the fact that there's some interest, but there are not perhaps formal occasions or supported intentional occasions where that can happen, which is sort of the 3 and thereafter. Let's go to the next slide. So that was, as I promised, sort of setting the stage segment. I want to turn now to thinking about assignments themselves and how to tap into their power more fully. Next slide. Next. Most campuses, 80%, according to NILOA's most recent survey of provosts, which came out in 2014, now have institution-level outcomes that apply to all students. That's great. It's real progress, but it's not enough. Next slide. It can sometimes seem a very long ways from what goes on in the classroom. So the challenge, sort of represented by the arrow there, is to translate those outcomes into the practices that occur where faculty and students meet in the classroom broadly construed, of course, in all the various settings in which teaching and learning occur. And especially to translate them into the assignments and assessments that faculty require and students undertake. Next slide. Two of my colleagues underline this challenge, the challenge of moving from lofty, broad, and sometimes vague descriptions of student performance to demonstrable evidence that students have indeed become proficient. Assignments at their best animate our big, high-level outcomes, which we hope aren't vague and broad, but they certainly are high-level, and bring them to life. And such are also one of the most powerful forms of assessment because they're not add-on, but into the ongoing work of teaching and learning, valued by both faculty who design them and the students who take them. And therefore, more likely to lead to improvement that assessment is, as Peter Ewell, I'm sure many of you know Peter Ewell's work, as exoskeletal, that is, something sort of fastened on to the outside of the organism. Next slide. So here's back and confess that I feel a little uneasy talking about assignments as if their importance were brand new insight. Of course not, and certainly that isn't what I want to convey. All the creative assignments, we've all done them, and among us, you all know a great deal about their design and use. At the same time, as we've seen from the little poll, there may not be sort of purposeful planned occasions to share what we know about assignments to our wisdom of practice and experience to one another. And so this slide is really my attempt to capture some of what we know about assignments and their place on campus. I have even occasions to acknowledge, articulate, or think about. So I'll go through these kind of quickly. First, just noted, is that assignments animate and bring to life our high-level, institution-level outcomes, whether those are the essential learning outcomes from AAC and U, the DQP, or whatever. Second, assignments then signals to students about what kind of learning we expect, and just what that learning looks like, really concretely. And this, assignments are not just a form of assessment, that takes us to the third bullet, but also a way to foster and advance learning. Assignments, put it differently, are one of the most powerful pedagogical tools. We talk a lot about teaching methods, but assignments have a special power in terms of teaching. About the character of assignments themselves, the first three bullets, I think we also say that opportunities for faculty to think together and work together on assignment design have not, in most places, been overly abundant over the years. And again, the poll, I think, supports that. I've been working in teaching and learning for more years than I want to count, and I recall events, say, 20 years ago, I guess I am counting, where the idea of just sharing the syllabus was foreign and scary. Then there are many more forums and occasions for exchange about teaching and curriculum, and lots more conversation. But at least is mine. Assignments have often remained more private. We keep them sort of closer to the vest. now starting to get their due and become a topic of intentional civic conversation. And so last bullet here points to the importance of making the intellectually challenging work of assignment design more visible and more valued. So as a writing assignment is not easy, it's challenging intellectual work. NILOA's initiative and the library collection has provided opportunity to think about what makes for a good assignment. And I'd like to share my list with you, which is completely a work in progress. And I'm going to use the chat feature to add to this list or question it, amend it, embroider it, add your ideas, add talk. And then we'll turn to that number 9. That's what I'm urging you to include, to add to, get to the end of the list. So first, yes, it depends. There's no recipe for a good assignment. We all know that. Good assignments come in different shapes and sizes and colors, depending on all kinds of things. Of course, content in the larger curriculum, students' preparation, the particular background they bring to it, and most important probably, depends on what outcomes the assignment is intended to foster and elicit. To the second bullet, intentionality. Good assignments are designed with outcomes in mind. Think backward design, beginning with a clear sense of the learning we want to elicit from students. In fact, 9% of the participants in our charrette said, in a follow-up survey we've done, I'm more aware of aligning my assignments with desired institutional outcomes. More aware, that is, after participating in that process. Naturally, this is number 3, to be clear to students. And this turns out to be harder than it sounds. Because our field so well, we're so deeply inside them, we take for granted the ways of thinking and the sort of intellectual practices that we're asking students to learn and demonstrate. And so it's easy to be way less than explicit about those, to kind of hide the ball, if you will. Those elements often come out of what faculty members at Indiana University call decoding the discipline, and being explicit about what we want students to do. 70% of charrette participants say the process that I was describing helped me more clearly see my students through my assignment, through my students' eyes, which is at least a step in the right direction. Being clear to students is good, but to tap the pedagogical power of assignments, to stimulate learning as well as document it. Effective assignments are often characterized, at least as I see it, by what composition scholar John Bean calls a tip or task as intriguing problem. I really like that phrase. But you ask, what does an intriguing task or problem look like? Well, it depends, no recipe here. But what comes to mind for me are tasks that are unscripted, as AAC&U often says, rather than rote, and there is an actual real-life problem or question, something, an example of authentic assessment, if you will, that will actually capture students' interest. Good assignments reflect different ways of knowing, different preparation, different sets that students bring to their learning. In this set, they reflect and create opportunities for equity-mindedness. They present meaningful feedback, often in multiple drafts or a sequenced set of tasks that move toward a more integrated, culminate performance. They include preparation and guidance, scaffolding, if you will, which can come in lots of different forms, from step-by-step directions, opportunities for students to reflect on their learning and monitor their own progress, to self-assessment along the way. Finally, we get to your addition. Good assignments are aligned and linked with other good assignments. This is actually the most important and most neglected point on this list. The idea is that no assignment, if you think about it from a student's point of view, is an assignment. Though we may create them as if they were sometimes, and we may inadvertently signal they are to students. A scholarly studies warns about what he calls course-centricism. Our course is the only course students are taking. If you flip, though, and begin thinking about how courses relate to each other, assignments can build on or echo one another. This is the focus of our upcoming shred, in fact, connecting assignments. They be assignments in a first-year course or a rising junior sort of setting, connecting that with an assignment that's given in IMO capstone. It could create more coherent pathways for student learning. And then if there are ideas coming in through the chat function that add to this list or improve on it in some way.
Actually, yes, I see one. I was also thinking up my own. Here's one. I found students believe a good assignment not only clarifies an intriguing issue, but also contains clarification of how the exercise will be evaluated. So not just the thing that it's asking the student to do, but helping the student to see clearly about how the faculty member is going to think about and respond to assignment. That was what came in. Pat was, looks like we got more coming in. Here's another, you can probably see this, but I'm going to read it just, for Pat's sake, and you might be thinking about this, Pat. In design assignments, we should ask what a student is expected to know and be able to do in order to succeed, and what success prepares them, in that assignment prepares them for the next assignment. So I guess that figuring out, to me, that there's a kind of tension between total clarity and helping the student get ready for the thing that they don't know yet. Pat, do you have any thoughts about that?
Those are both terrific points, and I see a third one there about rubrics, and I'll just start with back to the comment, I believe it's from Dan McInerney, about a good assignment having, including clarification of how the exercise will be evaluated. Absolutely. Why is that not on my list? It certainly should be. And in fact, the assignments in the assignment design library, we ask that they all answer that question in some way or another. It's an element, really, if you think about it, of this backward design feature and of connecting larger outcomes to the task that the assignment actually asks students to undertake. So whether that means sharing the rubric itself, I've heard different views of that. That would be my inclination, but some clarification is certainly important. The other point is very interesting as well, and it speaks to the fact that assignments can't be, and it's kind of the point, an assignment exists in a context, and it won't, no matter how brilliantly devised it is, it won't work unless we're really tuned in to what students need to do to succeed in that assignment. And so assignment giving is really part of the teaching. I'll just say that one of the interesting and sometimes challenging things we've seen in the assignment library is that to talk about assignment, you really have to layer the whole course. That makes for a pretty big package of things to go through, but it speaks to the importance of the point that Lawrence has made. So thanks for others. Yeah.
I just, Susan, I had a thought as you were talking. Maybe, and I don't think we've discussed this before. The question about clarity to students is really much on my mind. I mentioned that good assignments are connected, or ought to be connected, to threshold concepts in the discipline and field, and I know there's a lot of emerging interest out there in threshold concepts and epistemologies and that sort of. But as I was thinking about that, I thought there's a kind of tension between the need for clarity and the need to get students into a liminal space where they're a bit uncomfortable so that they learn. And if you had some thoughts about that.
Well, I think that it's a little bit related to equity-mindedness, trying to design an assignment that will work for students who come at it in quite different ways. So you want a task that's engaging, but you want maneuvering room as well. And there is a tension between those. I think that tension, the balance within that tension shifts as you move from, say, first year experiences and assignments to, say, capstone experiences where you want much more open-endedness and the capacity for the student to really take up the assignment in his or her own way. I think that's part of what's meant by this notion of signature assignments, which I'll come back to a little bit later as well. So all great points. Yeah. Anything there? Let's look at the next slide. Just a little long one. We look at a couple examples. These are both from the assignment library. Next slide. I'm wondering who designed this one are on the web. So if so, I hope they will text in and say whatever they want to say. So I know this is kind of a lot of text. As you see from the top of the slide here, the citation, an assignment on quantitative reasoning, not actually only that, but largely. And it was designed as part of a new general education program at the University of North Dakota. So I'm going to be quiet here for a minute so you can read it. I'll just say that it comes with a set of materials, data, that students draw from, some step-by-step directions and questions to students, and also, yes, on a previous point here, a rubric that explains how the work will be evaluated. So I'm going to be quiet for a minute while you read. So had we rolled enough in time, we would look at the full submission entry in the assignment library, and I would really encourage you to do that because in addition to the assignment, which you have a list of here, you'll also find a reflective memo from the authors that explain, you know, what comes this is after, how students respond, and they speak to the sort of elements of a good assignment that you saw in the previous slide. One assignment. Slide. So here's what's different. James Madison University. It's from a co-taught interdisciplinary course on play. I want to teach a course. Dan Robinson, you see the name at the top there, is in visual studies. And Zinowitz is in religion. And this assignment was designed to assess the DQP proficiencies you see at the bottom of the slide, applied collaborative learning. So I'll just walk you through this real quickly. This is a small group assignment. If you search on that feature, you'd find it, where students really work together, applying the more sort of theoretical concepts that have been part of the course in order to design and produce a toy or a game. That toy is then presented to an audience in a kind of sales pitch format, which allows and indeed requires students to actually explain the thinking behind it. And I love this. The presentation occurs as part of an exhibit tailored to sort of a general public, which means there's a real audience. I think that's part of the notion of authentic assessment, and really raises the possibility of interesting feedback. The last little paragraph on this slide makes an important point about this and probably all the assignments in the library, which is that you can't probably just pluck one out and use it in a completely different context. And indeed, our thought was never that, you know, I'm desperately seeking an assignment for Tuesday morning and I'll go to the library and grab one. Indeed, the value of shared assignments is probably mainly as a stimulus for new ways of thinking about assignments, visions of the possible, and templates or formats that can be filled in different ways. Let's turn to some lessons and models from campuses that have begun providing occasions and support for faculty to come together to work on assignment design and use. Next slide. So one way to go in that direction, a set of steps that begin with what is probably the status quo at a lot of places. Individual faculty working hard and well on their own assignments, but pretty much in isolation. That's the lower left blue box. Moving from that reality to create a wider circle of involvement where people can share assignments, get some feedback, make improvements, to the next stage up, where those occasions are really focused not just on each individual assignment, but on connecting them, as I suggested a bit ago. Move from my work to our work, or my course to our curriculum, as I heard Susan say. And that, in turn, brings us to the black box in the upper right, this notion of capacity for signature work, which is work integrated and applied, and which draws on the individual student's interest and experience, and thus has his or her signature. I love that, and it goes back to your comments, Susan, and probably others as well, about that the tension between clarity and creating a space for students to really put their signature on their work. Next slide. So how do you work that final step, building capacity for signature work? What we learned by looking at different campuses is that it's important, this kind of goes the same, but I'll say it, to have different ways that people can enter into this work, depending on institutional context and cultures and readiness. So entry points we've seen. I won't walk them one by one. Really, to think about what will be in your setting. At least for some faculty, there's a real eagerness and readiness to actually share assignments that they're using. This is where NILOA started. Others people may just not be quite ready for that. Perhaps there's less of a culture of pedagogical sharing. And so instead of asking people to bring an assignment, it might make sense to just create an occasion where people can begin talking about assignments more generally. What makes it good for a good one? How do we think about it in relation to our new curriculum? Some place occasions to work on completely new assignments, not drawing what already exists, stimulated by the option of the DQP, for instance, or, again, a new curriculum. Some by looking at samples of student work, say, excellent example of problem solving, and work backward from that to imagine prompts that would actually elicit such work. So the punchline is to imagine different entry points for work that work different people in different circumstances. Point 2 under resources describes all of these options and gives examples from named campuses. So this is more resources, and I think it speaks for itself with some further lessons from campuses that are doing this kind of work, perhaps some of yours. I'll just quickly point to the key here. Start where people are with the assignments they're already creating and their own thinking about assignments. Faculty broadly. Folks say with tenure, but adjunct faculty, think about bringing library faculty into this. They have a huge amount to offer, especially around things like use of information resources. Teaching center staff, student affairs folks should be at the table. Think about involving students in this work on assignment design. I'll just say NILOA has not been able to do that, bringing them to a national event. But on campuses, I encourage you to think about how that might be possible. Using, I suppose you might say. Think about how to support this work. These kinds of conversations and occasions don't create themselves. So take advantage of existing structures, a teaching center, assessment office, maybe a department for college, maybe general education program, mechanisms for making the work that goes on, the assignments design, visible and available for recognition and reward. Some campuses are now creating their own repositories of assignments and other pedagogical learning objects, if you will. Faculty are starting to list their assignments. You remember my mentioning citations in their CVs. And finally, collaborate. Keyword in the title to this webinar, collaborate across your own campus with other campuses. Think of working by discipline. And maybe there's a place for employers in these conversations as well. Next slide. So this brings us to the final few minutes of my comments, at least. So here are a few things I would point you toward. They are all on the NILOA library site, probably on the NILOA site more generally as well. I would definitely point you toward AAC's and U's work on quality collaboratives. That's really where one of the places that we first saw work on assignments start to emerge around the DQP. You see the link to lots of things that have come out of that work, good tools. Peter has written a brilliant paper about the notion or the concept of assessment that comes along with the DQP, and he underlines as part of that the focus on assignments, things that go on in classrooms as the key to good assessment. A new by Cliff Adelman about the language of outcomes, very instructive for thinking about the language you use for designing assignments. And a paper that includes examples of different points and sort of strategies for bringing people together around this work. That's the Hutchings, Jankowski, and Newell piece, where campuses and names are named. And finally, the NILOA library site itself. And the next slide will take you to a few screenshots from the library. I'm embarrassed to just say that I looked at this site this morning. I guess I hadn't looked at it for a little while, and it's actually morphed a little bit. So this is not exactly what you'll see, but I think I can use it just to kind of give you a little sense of navigating the site. Most important here are the items across the top. I don't know if you've figured out how to do little arrows here. But what's worth looking at is the notion to look for resources. The things I just mentioned are there, along with, I don't know, 10 or 15 others. Paper librarian about what they contribute, a list of good questions to ask about an assignment, and so on and so forth. Probably most important sort of link at the top there is Browse Our Library. That says assignment. And if you go to it, it will either say browse or submit. If you go to submit, you can submit an assignment online. I mentioned earlier, and I would love to see assignments from those of you who are working on them. If you go to browse, you'll see a list of keywords, tags. I mentioned them before. And you can also fill in a little item there that asks you for the assignment's author or title if you're looking for something particular as you go to the site. And then when you do that, let's go next slide, you'll call up an actual entry in the library. And here's what you'll see. The name of the assignment, this one is from someone in philanthropic studies at Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis. The author, you see the citation that I mentioned, and you see a pretty short little sort of elevator speech about what it is. Then you scroll down the page, which you can't do here since it's a screen capture. You'll find the reflective memo I mentioned earlier that really sets the stage. Why this assignment? What am I after with this assignment? Why is it important in our context? How did I create it? Have I revised it? What is my experience with students doing it? Many people say, I found I needed a lot more scaffolding, a lot more structure in the assignment to make it work for students. If you were to scroll down, you'd find two PDFs. Let's go to the next screen. Slide. And you'll find two things, those two PDFs. One is the assignment itself as it's given to the students. So again, you see here your philanthropic autobiography. This is a wonderful assignment. Requires lots of reflection. And the next PDF, the second PDF, I know you read this, I'm just pointing to it as a placeholder. The other PDF is a rubric or a list of criteria. Many of the rubrics look like it's a matrix, and many of these are adaptations or actual borrowings from AAC and U's value rubrics, which are now everywhere, and it's made a huge difference. Next slide. So I wanted to have comments and questions. I hope this has been helpful. And I could just end by reiterating the point I was trying to make at the outset of this presentation, which is that focus on assignment is valuable in its own right, but it's also a doorway into large issues about teaching and curriculum and assessment, about how well we communicate our expectations to students, how to create coherent pathways to learning, and how to make really powerful signature work possible for all our students. So with that, I'd love to hear your thoughts, examples, questions, and so forth. And pulling things out of the chat feature, which I'm looking at as well. So thank you.
Yes, and this is Susan Albertine. I'm here thinking about language and the metaphors we've been developing for assignments and how different that is from the way I thought assignments, especially coming out of graduate school. And I liked some of the metaphors that you used really do seem to me very helpful to give some thoughts about how to imagine and develop an assignment in context. And the sling metaphor and ideas about diction related to the way you explain the assignment as a form of communication with students. I think that's all very helpful to people to build a context and to imagine the assignment in context. Pat, we've been talking about this a lot, trying to figure out how to visualize the importance of assignments. I don't know if you want to refer about that. So that's one thing I thought we might talk a little more about. And then there's also an idea that Norm Jones has put onto the on chat, that there are ways that you can do this using a broader approach to gen ed courses, as he is suggesting. This is, I guess, getting to context, inviting all those teaching in a gen ed area to come together to talk about their common pedagogical values as a way of constructing outcomes and scaffolding and interconnecting. Or even, it seems like a treasure hunt, I guess, thinking metaphorically, this that they already have outcomes. So about that.
Yeah, I love that idea. My sense has often been, watching for many years as campuses have struggled with assessments and outcomes and so forth, is that you can drive yourself over the edge by constructing outcome assessments out of whole. Start with where people are. Just as Norm was saying there, inviting people to come together and discover what they already have in common in terms of value. Looking at something concrete to stimulate that conversation. It might be a sample of student work in response to an assignment, or it might be an assignment itself. One of the things we've seen in the NILOA events is that when people start talking about assignments and they're pressed by their colleagues to say, what are you really after here? I mean, a lot of things get made explicit that are not otherwise, and that's powerful conversation. And just as Norm's comment suggests, a way of creating a sort of more shared vision of what we're up too.
Yeah, the idea of making the implicit explicit. As you'll see in the chat, Dan McInerney made a suggestion that maybe NILOA could add some general suggestions about process procedures for a charrette if you wanted to do it yourself, kind of a how-to guide with some flexibility. What do you think of that idea?
I think it's a big idea, and if you go to the resources section of the assignment library site, you will find some of that. I'd be very interested in feedback from Dan and others about what else would be helpful. One thing you'll find is a list of the kinds of questions you can usually ask about an assignment. Some of them are kind of obvious, but I think it's a very helpful list. It's a couple pages, so it's pretty fleshed out, and they're questions that we've heard at the charrette. There's a short account of the charrette model itself, just sort of the timing. You know, I'm approximately 5 people in the group. Give the author whose work is on the floor, on the table, if you will, just a couple minutes to set the stage, have people read them in advance if possible. 15 or 20 minutes of back and forth, and then some written feedback back to the author. And there's a form on the library site for that written feedback. So as I say, I'd love to hear what else would be helpful, but you will find some of those things already.
And you're getting some thanks in the chat for pointing people to that resource, and including another observation that this has been a very valuable introduction, maybe because we tend to take assignments for granted, having worked with them for some of us decades and decades, reorienting one's mind to imagine a more attentional, a more scaffolded, a more collaborative approach is a very different way of thinking about assignments and does take some practice. Let me see. There's anything else?
I'll jump in, Susan. I am really excited about the potential of starting conversations among colleagues on campuses, on an individual campus or across campuses that share students. The question is, how does my assignment relate to your assignment? And how can we make more of the connections that might be sort of implicit but could be made more emotional, more visible to students?
Yes, really good. I mean, back to the metaphor idea, assignments are doorways.
Yeah.
I never did think about them that way, but if you have a group of transfer partners, we've seen that in some of our other projects, the Quality Collaboratives project you mentioned, where we had 2-year, 4-year partners from regions talk about what they were doing, and they came to assignments, and that opened up a lot for them. Dan is pointing to the new essay, Beyond Compliance, in Change Magazine. Very helpful resource and available online. It's the September-October Change Magazine, so if you're looking for an article that's thoughtful about assessment, that moves you beyond that drill concept of doing this work merely for compliance, that's a good one. And finally, an observation that tuning is an occasion to create the kind of partnerships that allow you to come together and see assignments as doorways. So we're close to the end. Do you want to offer any closing thoughts?
Often talk about assignments. I would love to hear from you who are doing that. NILOA is really trying to, collect ideas and models, variations on what we're doing in some cases, so we can share them with others. There is another Change Magazine article coming out, I think early in this new year, about this work. So we're trying to get the word out, and we would love to expand the word, if you will, by hearing about what some of you are doing. So I wish you all the best with that, and eager to hear about it.
Finally, if anybody comes up with a good visual, Pat and I were trying to imagine how you could make a picture of the importance of assignments, send it our way, because it's a challenge. We were starting to think of gardening metaphors, but we haven't gotten as far as we might. We hope that you will send any ideas to us. Melissa, you might have a contact information at the next slide. There it is. We would be very happy to hear from you if you've got some further thoughts, other questions. We were glad to see that you all came. I'm sure that this webinar will also be valuable to people who download the recording that we'll put in the LEAP Campus Toolkit. So, Pat, many, many thanks to you, and thanks to everyone who joined us. Until our next webinar, we wish you very well. Thanks. Bye.
Thanks, Amy.